Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Cunningham, and what I'm going to be showing you how to do today is how to name and write the formulas for what I call type 3 ionic compounds. What type 3 ionic compounds are compounds that contain a polyatomic ion. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now, and what I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with how to name them. Really, these are pretty easy to name if they don't have a metal in them that have more than one oxidation state. So we're going to start here with this BaNO3 and the FeC2H3O2. So how you name, really the most important thing that you have to do when you're naming a compound, and even when you're writing the formulas, which we're going to do next, is you have to be able to identify the polyatomic ion. Anytime you have more than two elements involved, for instance, right here we have Ba, which is barium, we have N, which is nitrogen, and we have O, which is oxygen. Anytime you have three elements involved, three or more, it's going to be, there's got to be a polyatomic ion in there. So you have to be able to identify that. So whenever you're naming, you can use that flow chart that I gave you yesterday. And what that flow chart does, if you don't have a paper copy, it's also on Google Classroom. But what you have to do is the first question you ask yourself is there a metal in the compound? The question is yes, barium is a metal. Is it a transition metal? Because that answer is no, that means that we're not going to have to use Roman numerals. We don't have to do that. So all that we have to do is, I guess, once we count how many elements are involved, we see that there's three. So how we're going to name this compound is we're just going to write what this first element is, that is barium. Then all we do is we name that polyatomic ion, and that polyatomic ion happens to be called nitrate. So to name this compound, all that we would say is this is barium nitrate. And actually, there is a problem right here. I actually screwed up this formula. It should look like this. But it's still barium nitrate. So this next one is FeC2H3O2. So remember, if we're using that naming flowchart, which you're going to be able to use, first question you have to ask yourself, is there a metal? Yes, there is a metal. It is iron. So we can write that down. Next, we have to ask, is it a transition metal? Yes, it is a transition metal. So now we're going to have to put a Roman numeral here to identify what the charge is. So remember, we worked on this a little bit yesterday. And what we did is, in order to identify the charge of the cation, what you have to do is you have to take the charge of this polyatomic ion into account. So this polyatomic ion is actually called acetate, and its charge is actually -1. So I'm going to write -1 right there. But then you also have to look, how many acetates do I have? Remember, this entire thing right here, I said an important thing you have to do in naming these ones with polyatomic ions is you have to treat it as a unit. So this entire thing is acetate. Now we have two of those. So we multiply that -1 charge by 2, which means I have a total of a -2 charge from this acetate. Now, a rule of ionic compounds is that there has to be a balance of charge. So if this is a -2 charge, and the charge of iron has to balance that out and make it 0, that means that this iron has to have a +2 charge. So we have a +2 that cancels out the -2. So that means that this iron, we're going to put iron 2, because that's the charge of the iron. Then we just name the polyatomic ion. And I already told you that is acetate. So that's how you name these ionic compounds that contain polyatomic ions. Now let's look at writing the formula. Writing the formula is actually fairly easy. All that you have to do is you start by just writing what's given to you. So I'm given potassium. Write the symbol and its charge. And then write the formula for carbonate and also its charge. It's on your ions list if you need to check or if you need to look it up. It should also be on that handout that I gave you, the flow chart. On the back of that flow chart, there's a list of polyatomic ions. Carbonate should be on there. Its formula is CO3 with a -2 charge. Now, the reason I put parentheses around that is just to show you that it's a unit. I'm not going to treat these as separate elements. I have to treat the polyatomic ion as a unit. So what we're going to do is now we do the crisscross method. So we take this 1 and we bring it down here as a subscript on the carbonate. We take this 2 and we bring it down as a subscript on the potassium. So our final formula would look like that. This is potassium carbonate. Okay, so notice I took the parentheses off. The reason I took the parentheses off is because I don't have another subscript down here. If I had another subscript, like over here in my iron 2 acetate, I'd have to include the parentheses, because what that does is that kind of works like in math class when you do the distributive property, when you have like 2 times and then in parentheses x plus 1, that means you do the 2 times the x and the 2 times the 1. Same thing here. Whenever you have parentheses, this 2 here means you actually have 2 times 2 oxygens, which is 4. You have 2 times 3 hydrogens, which would be 6. You have 2 times 2 carbons, which would be 4. If you don't have those parentheses there, it looks like you have 22 oxygens, and we don't. So this last one, this is probably the most difficult that your writing formulas is going to be. You have a transition metal, which gives you the charge, and it gives you the polyatomic ion, which is phosphate. So you need to start out writing your formulas. Symbol for gold is Au. Remember, Au, give me some gold. And it's got a +2 charge. Phosphate is PO4 with a -3 charge. So we do the crisscross method. So we take this 2 and write it down as a subscript. We take this 3 and write it down as a subscript on the gold. Okay, so I'd write Au. That subscript is now 3. Remember, you don't include the minus and don't include the plus when you write them as subscripts. Then I'm gonna actually write PO4 here, and I'm gonna write a 2 down here. Now, do not leave it like this, because remember, this looks like we have 42 oxygens. This is where you have to use parentheses. Anytime that you put a subscript on a polyatomic ion, you have to put parentheses around it to make it look like that. So now, there is our correct formula for gold 2 phosphate. It would be Au3 PO42. Okay, so that's how you name and write these ionic compounds. Remember, you can use your flow chart. The assignment I had for you today is just a bunch of these. If you can do these, then you can probably do the easy ones, which was our assignment for yesterday. So I hope that helped. If you have any questions, just go through, do the best you can. If you need help, then get a hold of a classmate that seems like they know what they're doing. Or I will also be back to school around 2 o'clock today. So if you have questions, you can shoot me an email and maybe stop in for a minute or two after school, and I can give you some help. But I do have practice at basketball practice, so I won't be able to stay for too long, but I will be able to hopefully point you in the right direction.